It's always been a crime, but then this week we had a prosecution when a young woman in Belfast was given a 3-month suspended prison sentence for buying pills on the internet to induce an abortion. Will we see another woman before the courts seeking to terminate a pregnancy? On the panel we have Kate O'Connell, Fine Gael TD for Dublin Bay South, Cora Sherlock from the Pro-Life Campaign, and Kitty Holland, Social Affairs Editor with the Irish Times. Later, we'll be joined by Shane Beattie of KFM and Sinead Ballantyne of the Kildare Post to preview tomorrow morning's newspapers. If you'd like to comment on the programme, you can text us at 53131 and place the word tonight before your comment, or send us a tweet at #MinB, or email us at tonight@tv3.ie. And there's more after the break. Cora, I suppose I'd have to start with you on this and the pro-life people. The prosecution of a young woman in Belfast this week. Her life probably destroyed now. She'll never go to Australia, United States and so on. Criminal record is a very serious thing. Do you think prosecuting people is a good idea?
No, I think that the first thing that I would like to say, Sam, is what I've always said about this issue and what the Pro-Life Campaign's position has always been, which is not to prosecute women in these situations, but instead to target abortionists and abortion providers. And I think, you know, if we look back at the last week or the last 10 days, it's been
but will you then be joining anyone who's campaigning this week to say, stop charging these women?
But what I've already said is that we've always campaigned, and we've always said that we don't think women should be prosecuted. But it's just not as simple as that. It's a far more complex issue. Let me just talk for a minute about how distressing this week has been, I think, for people on both sides of this debate. First of all, we hear about the trauma and distress of that woman facing an unplanned pregnancy, a difficult situation, and feeling that she has to resort to abortion. That's not something that's good for any woman.
And if she had £1,000, she wouldn't have had any trouble with the law. She wouldn't have had trouble with
Just let me finish, because I think we need to reflect firstly on what's happened this week. That's what we heard at the beginning of the week, and obviously we don't know all of the facts of this case, so we need to say that as a caveat as well. But we then heard during the week about the experience of her housemates and how they felt in the middle of this scenario, and how they felt about seeing the remains of an unborn baby in their household bin. And just for the viewers at home, what they were talking about is a fully formed,
very distressing.
A fully formed unborn baby, very distressing, with fingers and toes, something, a little baby about the size of my pen, finding it in their finding it in their household bin. And I think that what viewers will be asking themselves is, how would I feel if I found that in my household bin?
I'd be upset too, but I'm not sure I would want someone prosecuted by the police.
And I've already said that I don't want someone prosecuted. But can I just say...
So how do we deal with it then? What we want to stop are women, individual women. I have daughters, I've had a mother, I've had women around me all my life. I do not want to see them prosecuted.
Sure, and I'm a woman, and I don't want to see women prosecuted either, which I think I've said a few times. But can I just say, Sam, that the other thing...
Change the law. That's one way of stopping it, isn't it?
But you know, change the law means the law will always be silent on abortion. And that's not something that happens anywhere else in the world. Abortion always forms part of the criminal law throughout the world.
Well, if you want to stop prosecutions, changing the law, I would have thought, was the most effective way of stopping it.
Well, if you look back through the application of the law in Ireland, it's always been applied in a very humane and sympathetic way. A pro-choice campaigner that I discussed this issue with during the week admitted that there hasn't been a prosecution since the 1950s. And
since Nurse Cadden.
And that's what we want to see continue. But we also want to see the law being there to protect a situation where people take an abortion pill recklessly as part of a publicity stunt. That's already happened in this country.
Well, maybe. I don't think there was any publicity stunt involved here. There was a woman now has a suspended prison sentence. She has a criminal record. It's very serious. I suppose, Kate, you're a TD. Realistically, there seems to be absolutely zero chance now in the next stall of the law being changed. I know that you came out.
I will answer your question, but before I do, I have to just say that it was not a fully formed child that was found in the bin. It was.
I'm not aware.
It was within the first trimester, And also, I think it's completely disingenuous in this awful case to say that, I think that to make some sort of correlation between those that have, for their own reasons, taken abortion pills to demonstrate a point. There's no correlation here between this girl that was in this awful position and had to go through that awful scenario on her own, and really for somebody to discard, I suppose, the aftermath of an induced miscarriage in their domestic waste. It just goes to show the scenario she was in and how she was thinking at the time. And I suppose, not to get into it too much, but I mean, I've had a miscarriage in my life, and it's essentially what you're inducing, and it's a very traumatic thing to go through. And I think to make any correlation between that and people taking things to make a political point or whatever, I think it's unfair. But your question to me, sorry.
Yeah, there seems little chance of any change to the law. The law was changed last year, I think. Is it 14 years a woman faces in the Republic?
Yes, and I suppose, I mean, we don't know what the next government is going to be, but, I mean, my concern would be that I suppose this repealing the Eighth Amendment or replacing the Eighth Amendment or addressing this issue didn't form a large part of the document which I mentioned at the introduction. And for me, that's a bit of a concern, because we know that people care about this issue. For me, it was the most prominent issue when I was campaigning in the general election, and it is something that is not going away. It has been contentious since the dawn of time. We're not all going to leave here tonight on the same page.
But you also now, through that campaign, now Lucinda Creighton, who did what many thought was a very brave thing, she made a very principled decision. She said, I cannot take the whip off a party that breaks its word on this. She feels very strongly about the right to life. You feel very strongly about the right to choose. Would you go as far as Lucinda Creighton would? Would you say, if we don't get proper reform here, I will...
No.
I'll discard the whip?
No, absolutely not.
Well, is that not a bit unfair? Because you were a bit cruel on Lucinda through the campaign.
I don't think I was cruel to anybody on the campaign, but I suppose what happened when Lucinda lost or didn't vote with the party was that this was, I suppose, trying to... Fine Gael were bringing in what was put upon us by the Supreme Court. No previous government had actually had the courage to do it. And I suppose I take it very personally when somebody votes against the protection of my life, and somebody who's basically been pregnant for the last 5 years of my life. I take it really personally. And Fine Gael, Enda Kenny has said that in all future votes on this, people can vote whatever way they want. So it may not rise. It may not rise.
Listen, I want to get on to... Can you tell me... people, as we know, you working in newspapers a long time now, people just don't get charged by the Director of Public Prosecutions and the police and so on by accident. Serious people have to make up their mind that there is going to be a prosecution here. How do you think the prosecution came about of this young woman in Belfast?
Well, I think once her housemates reported the fetus that they had found in the bin and knew that their housemate had been pregnant to the PSNI had to investigate. It was a crime under Northern Irish law. And once it was established that the fetus had been born by her, they had to send a file to the Crown Prosecution Service, or the Director of Public Prosecutions in the North, and prosecution took place. I mean, it was a chain of events that was perhaps inevitable.
I just wonder... have people looked the other way on occasions? I wonder. I don't know. No,
I'm sure they possibly have, yes.
Cora, do you know anything about that? Why would people... things like that just don't happen...
Well, no, they don't happen, and it's extraordinarily rare. I think the reason that this is a news story is because it is so rare for that to happen. And like I said earlier, the law has always been applied sympathetically and in a humane fashion towards women who are in a very distressed situation when they are pregnant and they don't want to be and they need supports. But Sam, I do want to pick up on a couple of things, particularly that Kate said, because Firstly, I wasn't making a correlation. I think it was quite clear that I wasn't making any correlation between this woman in a distressed state, as I've already said, and people taking abortion pills to make a political point. That's already happened in this country. The abortion pill bus went around, women putting, or campaigners putting women's health at serious risk. And we didn't hear anybody saying that that is not something that should happen. The law is there.
I can't imagine anybody encouraging that now.
Well, that happened, Sam, you know, and the law should stand against
it's
that.
probably wrong, but
the
I mean,
law should not be silent.
I
but
don't know if there's a...
Can I just say something else about 2013, because it has been brought up here. I find it incredible that we can talk about 2013, the 2013 Act, as protecting women's lives or their health, because let's talk about what that meant. It brought in abortion for the full 9 months of pregnancy where there's a threat of suicide. At the same time, there was no medical evidence anywhere in the world to say that abortion treats suicide.
Yes, but we do remember, and Kitty wrote the story about a woman in Galway who died.
I also interviewed Miss Y, who was suicidal, and despite the Protection of Life During Pregnancy Act being in force, she presented several times to several service providers throughout that pregnancy from 8 weeks pregnant, and didn't get access to services. So how was her...
But you see,
she was not protected.
What you're saying there does not change the fact that there is no medical evidence anywhere in the world to back up the 2013 Act that Kate's government party put in place. And I would expect people who are going to come on shows like this and talk about women's health and protecting women's lives to be wanting that to be repealed, particularly when we've had a week where we saw the report of a woman in England, Jade Rees, a 21-year-old woman who ended her own life after having an abortion. There's a real issue of abortion regret, which we're not talking about in this country. And I would like to see representatives and campaigners take these issues on board.
Yeah, there are some bad things that happen at that side too. But as Kitty has said, when you look, the vast majority of the difficulties that we've seen here, and that has really got the public upset, has been the women who have suffered. Some died because of legislation here that doesn't protect their lives.
That's also worse.
I mean, Savita would have lived if people had not been in fear of the law the way it is.
But that's actually not true. I mean, 3 independent reports found that tragedy was not due to the 8th Amendment. It was not due to the law in this country. It was due to mismanaged
Well, the HSE report actually did say that if she had been in another jurisdiction, they would have been expedited the delivery. Also, at the end of the inquest, the coroner said, when he turned to the jury, he said, and he went as far as he possibly could, being a coroner who cannot make comment on law. He said, I would ask the Oireachtas to take cognizance of the proceedings here. That's as far as the coroner could possibly go to say, please, Oireachtas, look at the law.
I'm afraid, Kitty...
the HSE report also talked about the need to expedite the delivery, and the delivery would have been expedited. More or less saying, and at the press conference to launch the report, the HSE report, the man who wrote the report, Professor Sabaratnam Arul Cumran, said that if she had been his patient, he would have aborted the pregnancy.
It is unfortunate.
And the HICWA report wasn't able to look at that, but I can tell you that the views of the people in HICWA were that you probably should have had the abortion.
You know, Kitty, you can write what you like with respect in the Irish Times,
These are all
but
facts.
the 3 reports did not find that Savita would have been saved by an abortion.
The
And I think that it's very unfortunate that the Irish Times and Kitty would not write that.
But you seem to think that everybody got the Savita story wrong except us. I think there was a very natural outpouring of sympathy for what happened. It should not have happened. It would not have happened in other jurisdictions. And people are worried about their sisters, daughters, wives going into the hospital.
24 hours after she arrived into that hospital, she asked to have the pregnancy terminated. If her request had been listened to, as it would have been in England, France, Germany, the Netherlands, the United States, if she wasn't in a Catholic hospital, she would be alive today. That is what her widower said. That is what her parents said. That is what Peter Boylan said.
There are 2 people on this panel who want to push a pro-choice perspective, as far as I can hear.
I want to push the truth.
Well, you know, in fairness, Kitty, you know, that's not pushing the truth.
Sorry, Cora, if I can interview here, people are entitled, they disagree with you.
They do disagree with me.
Yeah,
They're
well,
entitled to
it
disagree.
still hasn't been
40%
outlawed.
people
You know.
disagree.
But, you know, we are entitled, and the public, the viewers are entitled to hear the truth, and they're entitled to hear.
And that's why you're here tonight, and you're being given more time than any other individual so far this evening to put your
independent
point.
reports found that that was not the case, that the Eighth Amendment was not responsible, the ban on abortion in this country was not responsible for the tragic death of Savita Halappanavar. The reports identified 13 opportunities that were missed to save
Yeah,
her
but
life.
you know something,
That
Cora?
was a tragedy,
I live in this
but
country
it doesn't mean that we
too,
should introduce abortion,
and
Sam. And it's
I don't
wrong,
know
it's
anybody
wrong
who
that we
doesn't
should
think
use a tragedy
that
to
was an
introduce
awful
something as
tragedy
sinister, abortion.
that was preventable. As you know, now,
But
Kate,
of course
you're...
it was preventable, but not by abortion.
No, but better let someone else in speak to, I think. Kate, tell me, you're in a position now where you're in a party, there's political confusion, we're not sure if we're going to have a government or perhaps even an election again. Last week, listening to Willie Penrose, the chairman of the Labour Party, he seemed to be saying, correct me if I'm wrong, well, we have done our bit for the great liberal causes. We're going back to do what we should do. He would see his clients being the working class there, and I suppose the liberal arguments being more middle class. I'm not quite sure about that. Is there any possibility that this is going to get moved on? Are there many people in Fine Gael who think the same as yourself?
There are, definitely. I speak with people every day who are the same vein as me. My view would be that, I mean, Enda Kenny did say that we could have a citizens' convention on this, so we could bring people in, that it would happen within 6 months. Now, obviously, you know, things have drawn out a bit longer,
yeah.
But I would definitely think that it's in that document produced, but, you know, I would hope this is not going away. It has to be dealt with. So I think I suppose a reasonable way to go about it would be to have this citizens group come together to discuss and to see how we're going to deal with it. If we're going to repeal the Eighth, we have to discuss where we're going then, what fills that void while we're sorting out the legislation, and what wording. My view would be I would like a referendum, but I would like it done in the correct fashion so both sides get to, you know, air their views, and that people are made aware of the consequences of the law as it stands. And when you look at, I suppose, the girl, the tragic case up in the north, and you know, it's great that we think that certain scenarios like that have been treated in a humane and sympathetic way. Well, I mean, that's really not good enough, that you could be lucky enough in such circumstances to be treated in a humane and sympathetic way. I feel, as a woman or as a citizen, it's going to woman or man, I feel that, you know, my life should be protected, and that when I go in to have a child in the hospital, present myself to medical people, that I hand myself over to the care of people qualified, and that I'm hopefully come out the other end alive.
Yeah, what are the opinion polls saying at the minute? Those who think there should be a change in the law?
87%. 87% of people.
Cora, you don't
no, look,
believe
I
that?
mean, let's deal in the real world here. Nobody.
Well, opinion polls are the real world.
Nobody, you know, Sam, you know better than anybody that opinion polls are very reflective on what's being said in the media and what's circulating. Now, the debate, so-called debate on abortion in Ireland, is not in any way fair or balanced at the moment. It's wall-to-wall, one-sided coverage. I don't hear people asking the tough questions that should be asked. And, you know, I'm talking about things like...
Cora, you're asking them sometimes, I think, aren't you?
Can I just... Yeah, but I'm not the person who should be asking them.
But why else are you? You're here to represent the right to life argument.
Okay, well,
that's what you do.
Let me give you an example. In a 2-week period before before Christmas 2014, somebody did a review of the coverage of this issue, and there were 33 pro-choice articles versus 1 pro-life article. Now, nobody could say that that is in any way fair or demonstrative of both sides. I've done debates, like, for example, I did a debate recently, a college debate, where I said that in England, as is the case, 90% of babies diagnosed with Down syndrome are aborted. Somebody came up to me afterwards, visibly upset, and said, that couldn't possibly be true. I never heard of such a thing happening. I never heard of a situation as happened just last week in Poland, where a baby at 24 weeks survived an abortion and was left to die. I don't hear people talking about that.
Will you join in the convention that Fine Gael would like to have and that they've been proposing. I mean, if there is a clamour to change the law, presumably everybody would want to be represented there.
There is no clamour to change the law, Sam.
Oh, there is.
87%
there is.
I've just explained, I've just said, Kitty, and you know as well, that opinion polls are very determined by the question you ask. If you
They're
ask
determined
a question,
by people's views.
If you ask a question,
And people,
a loaded question, Sam, for example, do you agree with abortion to save a mother's life? People will say yes. But what you're not saying...
The question was
the
access
reality,
to abortion to be expanded, and it's 87%.
Can I just say that the reality is that abortion is never needed to save a mother's life? And in Ireland, we have one of the best records in the world of protecting women.
That all went after the Savita story. You know, this is a great little country to have babies in and so forth. But I would say when you talk about opinion polls there, I've got to say that after elections, really, you know, opinion polls are found to be very accurate.
Let's look at the last election then.
The exit polls got it dead right.
Let's look at the last election.
Can we talk about the criminalisation of women, which is what we actually came on to talk about? And it was very refreshing to hear Cora say that she would be against the criminalisation of women.
Said that.
Well, the only way we're going to change that, to remove the 14-year prison sentence, which hangs like a sword of Damocles over women,
party, not by the pro-life
because of the Eighth Amendment. The only reason that the punishment is so punitive is because in the Constitution, an unborn life is equated as equal to a mother's life. It has to be a very punitive, a very severe punishment. It's almost murder when you abort under Irish law at the moment. The only way you're going to remove the criminalisation of women, and it's the criminalisation of womanhood. I mean, crisis pregnancy has been part of womanhood since time immemorial. This abortion existed in Roman times. So we are criminalising the state of womanhood in this country. So the only way we can remove that is to deal with the Eighth Amendment, which means repealing. So I'm delighted to hear you're in favour of repealing the Eighth Amendment.
Let me ask you, Kitty,
a great step forward.
Do you think that it's not a great step forward, because I've always said that, and the pro-life campaign has always said that, but
that you're in favour of repealing the Eighth?
Do you think, no, that we don't want to criminalise?
Well, the only way you are going to stop
criminalising.
criminalising.
Let me ask
the law will be an ass if we're going to have this law.
Do you think that the law should be silent on every situation, because you can't have it both ways? So do you think that in the case of abortion up to birth, or babies on the cusp of viability, the law should be entirely silent there? Or again, in the case of people taking the abortion pill and manipulating the law, putting women's lives at risk to make a political point?
Well, first of all, on the issue of time limits, if you look at the HSE guidelines for health professionals, which were published in 2014, as we saw with Miss Y, when the unborn reaches a point of viability, 25, 26 weeks, the termination of the pregnancy is to deliver the pregnancy, is to deliver a live baby.
There's no legal obligation to do that.
That's in the guidelines, and that's what happened with Miss Y.
It's not
that's what's happening.
But there was no obligation on the doctors to do that.
You're saying there's no I mean, if you're talking about obligations, the obligation at the moment is to prosecute women who take the abortion pill, and you're saying we don't want
the baby. You see, all of this,
we're talking about being consistent in what we're talking about.
All of this works really well if you can do one thing, and that's ignore the second individual that's involved, because Kitty is talking there as if there isn't a second life. There is a human life that is ended in abortion.
Yes, and it's very difficult.
We started at the beginning talking about human remains in bin bags, and that's happening in abortion clinics right around the world.
Yeah.
So the viewers this evening need to think about the fact that if pro-choice campaigners get their way, and if they repeal the Eighth Amendment, we will be having abortion clinics in Dublin with bin bags out on the streets on bin days.
Yeah, but horror photographs like that are not a way to conduct a national argument, I don't think.
Horror photographs, Sam. I'm talking about reality.
Yes,
real life.
and that is
reality.
So in hospitals, awful things happen. Trust me.
But we don't end lives deliberately. That doesn't happen. Real lives,
really, we chose not to look at all of the awful, grisly things that happen.
So we're just going to turn away like Amnesty does. Amnesty turns the other way and ignores these human lives as being ended. Kate was out on the street yesterday with the Amnesty campaign.
Might I say, Cora, I have enough enemies in the world without adding amnesty to them.
Well,
if you don't want it, I'm not going to do that now.
Amnesty, so-called human rights organisation, which has turned its back on human beings. Where was Amnesty this week when that baby lost his or her life in Poland?
You are making what is now a less popular argument than it once was.
And was left to die.
But, Kate...
Where's Amnesty?
Look,
your view on
the fact of the matter is, as Katie said, crisis pregnancy happens at the dawn of time. Nobody sets out to have a crisis pregnancy. These things happen. And then you're caught in this issue. What my major issue, and I wrote an opinion piece last year on it, because it reflected my own views on it, because I had a child, or have a child, who had, he's born now, but I had a child with a fetal abnormality. Now, it turned out not to be fatal. But what my point is that I had the resources as somebody who's access to it, well-educated, and I have many family members.
You're a medical professional yourself.
So I had access to lots of information to help me make my decisions. But what I find so upsetting about the case in the North is that it became a class issue. If that girl had the price of it, she would have gone to England, and nobody would have been any the wiser. But if you're 19 and you're living in a house with clearly people she didn't know too well, I assume, and that she was all alone in this scenario, to have somebody in that scenario that they procure pills on the internet, which may not have been the right ones anyway, but it must have been, as the case turned out. Any girl with money would have been able to travel.
And for the sake of £1,000, she now has a criminal record, has a notoriety.
She also had to suffer alone in her home.
We're running out of time now. We'll have more after the break. Back, we're joined now by Shane Beattie of KFM and Sinead Ballantyne from the Kildare Post to take a look at tomorrow morning's newspapers. Sinead and Shane, tell me, you were listening to the discussion, I think, that we're having before the break there. Now, what I don't want to do is add another couple of sluggers on to be attacking Cora here. Did you have any views?
Well, just from a sort of media point of view, what Cora was saying about the lack of balance, I have to actually say I would agree with Cora. Just looking at some journalists on Twitter who purport to be from national media organisations, an awful lot of them are very clearly pro-choice when it comes to it, and I would have some concerns about that. Cora, I interviewed Cora actually recently, and we did have Amnesty on. I know they're not here tonight as well, but it's important to give both sides.
Do you think that they shouldn't have opinions or that they shouldn't share them?
They shouldn't share them, I would feel, if they're going to be working for a national organisation.
They should walk around like wise people, nodding a lot.
Yeah, well, their job is to report the views of everybody and to give people the information, but if they're going to come out with their own personal views, then I think we have a serious problem with the national organisation.
Sinead, do you have a problem with that?
I think absolutely the media should attempt to remain unbiased in the argument. It's such an emotive issue. I think everybody has their own opinions on it, but I think our job is to just purport the facts and, to inform.
And do you think Cora got a hard time last night by people ganging up on her?
I don't think so. I mean, I think everyone is entitled to put their point of view across.
Cora is well able to defend her point of view anyway, in fairness. So I think it was fairly balanced, Sam. I don't think you'd be in trouble for that one.
Yes. Well, listen,
we have till midnight, so you know.
Fair thing. So listen,